So on my last Metal Gear video where I talk about a possible rebalancing of MGS4, someone mentioned that hey, this would work really good in a co-op game. And that gave me an idea. Let's talk about how PvE could work in Metal Gear and how it's been a missed opportunity for decades now. So I'm Pliskin and today we're going to be talking about how possible PvE could work in a Metal Gear game. Now, when I'm talking about PvE or even PvP, any kind of cooperative or just multiplayer gameplay is probably a better way to put it, I want to emphasize that I'm mostly going to be talking about split screen. Now, of course, a lot of the ideas I talk about could translate to online play. However, as much as I enjoy waiting in lobbies or getting kicked out of a party with friends, or waiting 20 minutes for people to connect to a certain game type, or getting kicked out of a game type because the host quits the game because he's a little bitch that doesn't like losing, as much as that's all fun to me, the hackers, the lag, the, disconnect, the desync, that's cool and all. But I kind of like it a little bit better, I know I might be crazy for this, when I can just turn on a game, plug in two controllers, and just play whatever I want without any issues. Crazy, I know, I'm a little bit of a madman that way. But yeah, so keep that in mind. When I'm talking about this stuff, I am going to be talking about it from the perspective of couch co-op and split screen. So the first thing that needs to be addressed are some of the issues that comes with making split screen, or couch co-op period. This has to be a goal from the offset, because split screen or multiplayer on a single console has to be based in the actual engine you are working on for the game. So you can't just make a game and be like, okay, yeah, fuck it, we'll add some split screen. No. It's gotta be in the core foundational DNA of the game you're making, otherwise it's going to be a nightmare to implement. So from the get-go, a game would need to be designed with this in mind. With that being said, there are certain concessions or compromises you need to make when implementing split screen. So for example, with MGS4, when you have this whole big battlefield and crazy things going along, it would be possible to do that in split screen. However, since the game already has frame rate issues and is pushing itself in ways that, we can only imagine, it might put even more strain on it to be like, okay, yeah, do this, but in split screen. So we have to keep in mind the limitations of what we're trying to do. We have to keep in mind that, it might not look like, an RE engine game. It might look a little bit rougher. The textures might not be as detailed, or, there might not be as many enemies, or the environments might be a little bit more plain. Which doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it's still something we should keep in mind when thinking about a split screen experience. But how exactly would this work in Metal Gear? Let me walk you through a couple of scenarios that I, thought about after I read this comment, and we'll just kind of take things from there. So naturally, the first thing that comes to my mind when someone says split screen is Metal Gear Solid 2's VR modes. It's freaking brilliant and almost made for split screen. In fact, the developers who were working on MGS2 thought about implementing split screen into the VR missions, and it's not too hard to see why. You have these set little levels with a very specific goal, and then you have to go about them and do them. And some of these take place in actual areas from the game, and some of these take place in more abstract, plain-looking environments. Now with MGS2, I think split screen would work really well because of the more so fixed cameras, or not necessarily fixed but dynamic, where you don't really have control over it. So instantly when you control what the player can see or can't see and are more restrictive with the camera, it becomes easier to implement split screen because you're controlling what exactly gets loaded in. So if two players are there at the same time, you don't have to worry about loading in every single little thing around them. You could cull some things out when they're not looking at it. So for example, let's take one of the VR missions that takes place on the actual tanker. You could have the players start in the same spot, and based on where they are in that certain level, the camera's following them around. There's different hallways that have different pathways, so the players could go to these different paths, do whatever they have to do. It might become an issue if one player goes to like trigger another loading screen, because then the other player might have to be there along there with them, which honestly isn't too much of a hard thing to do, because if you guys are sneaking through an area, let's say it's that one area on the outside of the tanker, let's say. You both start towards the bow and you have to work your way upstairs and figure out which one of the doors you can go into. This is pretty easy because you could just make it one door that both players need to go to, put a little bit of a button prompt there, and then maybe you have to work together to open it. It's like a really hard lock or something like that. Or let's say like before you go downstairs, one player will enter a state in which the other player knows that they're ready to move on, and then they have to kind of catch up. The rooms and areas in MGS2, especially with the more abstract VR missions where there aren't other areas loaded, no stairs, nothing like that, again would be pretty easy to implement because it's such a small controlled space. You see, MGS2 is like MGS1 in the sense that all the rooms are like stealth puzzles. They're designed around a specific type of encounter, and you have a couple ways to figure out how to get through that encounter. And with a second player, I don't see it disrupting things too much. So there's a little bit of strategy that could be implemented in that way. You could build entire VR missions around this, like maybe one player has to sneak through an area or fight through an area, and another player is up with a sniper covering them. So let's say maybe first player is playing a snake. They're down on the ground with, an M4, and they need to push their way through a set of like cover blocks to make it towards the end goal. However, there's just a ton of guys shooting at them from platforms that Snake can't reach. So there's guys above him, there's guys on the ground, and they definitely have the advantage. If you were playing on your own, you'd probably get fucked. But a second player could be playing as Raiden, utilizing the PSG-1. So while Snake is fighting his way through the bottom floor, the second player is covering the first player with the sniper by shooting the guys on that upper level. Another mission that you could do based around split screen is somebody could be using the Nikita missile to try to hit something that's like vital to completing the mission, but enemies are coming after them. So one player has to defend the Nikita player with a variety of different weapons. Maybe you have to like set up traps or whatever, or just engage in like firefights. There's a lot you could do here, and VR missions allows the type of like design philosophy where I as a developer could tailor make certain missions dependent on specific kinds of teamwork, sandbox elements, or situations. But we could also apply this to a game like Snake Eater, a much larger Metal Gear game where you progress area by area to an end goal throughout the game, an entire campaign, not based in very arcadey VR missions, but in a much more like story-oriented experience. Now, Snake Eater does this thing where it shows you your carry weight, but nothing really matters based on it. And you find a shit ton of stuff that Snake will just cram right up his ass and carry everything he needs. Now, in a situation like Snake Eater, I think we could take inspiration from Resident Evil 5. Now, Resident Evil 5 is built on the premise of having a split-screen campaign where you and your partner have to trade certain items, healing items, sandbox items, ammunition, all that kind of stuff between each other in order to use everything effectively. Because one player does not have enough space to utilize everything you're going to need to get through the entire game. And even if you find a way to cram everything in there, it's still going to be much more awkward to switch through all this stuff than it is to just have a second player using some of the sandbox elements for you. So, for example, when me and my little brother played through the Resident Evil 5 campaign, I utilized power weapons like the shotgun and the magnum, whereas my brother would utilize stuff like the machine gun and the sniper rifle. So my brother was much more adept at the longer range situations, and I was much more adept for getting up close and personal and doing crowd control with certain enemies. So I was the close range bruiser and he was the longer range support. Of course, we both had a basic pistol to rely on when we needed to get adaptable, but that whole thing with you take these weapons, I take these weapons, and our roles are defined by the sandbox elements we have to use is a pretty cool fucking idea. So again, in a Snake Eater scenario, you could have the first player playing as Snake and the second player could be playing as Eva. Or it could be, Solid Snake and Meryl. Or again, it could be Snake and Raiden. Or it could be Venom Snake and, some random other soldier or Ocelot. You could use whatever characters you'd like here. And, you could start off, you both drop off into the jungle, you both start off with a very basic kind of suppressed pistol, and then as you go throughout the game, as you find stuff like the M63, the M37, the SVD, the M16, the AK, each of you will have a very limited carrying capacity. So for example, I could be playing and utilize the M63 and the shotgun and then have a whole bunch of grenades and health items or whatever and be that very combat oriented player. Whereas player 2 could be utilizing the tranq pistol, could be utilizing the M16 with a suppressor. So when we're going through stealth, they're required to take out the majority of enemies, but then as soon as we get an alert, that second player would take a step back and then I would rush in there with the M63 and the shotgun and just blow everyone to bits. And maybe they carry more extra health items so they could heal me while I'm doing this kind of stuff. Or maybe we both want to go stealth oriented, so I utilize the M16 and they utilize the MK22, so when we want to do non-lethal, they are the ones that are shooting. When we need to go lethal, I'll be the one that's shooting. And while we're sneaking around, we could coordinate each other's shots and point guys out to each other. You could also do bonus modes with this not tied to the campaign. You could do modes where it's smaller chunks of bases that you both have to figure out how to infiltrate. You get a set amount of weapons, you split them between each other, and then you make a plan around this given base. Maybe there's even a horde mode minigame where you have to hold a certain position and you choose whether or not you want to be stealthy and set up a bunch of traps or if you want to go guns blazing with each other. Hell, if you want, you could even go all sicko mode and do what Resident Evil Revelations 2 did, where you have this entire other bonus mode with different levels, which are basically combat gauntlets, and you have to level up different kinds of players, different kinds of weapons. You can create an entire other sense of progression with that. But again, that's crazy multiplayer modes, and I'm thinking of more so simple stuff here. When we get to Metal Gear Solid 5, this is where things start to become a little bit more interesting, as this is a much more modern-oriented game. So it's easier to picture something like this being made with split screen or couch co-op elements. So for example, we could use that idea from Snake Eater where there's a given base and then we both come in there. We could still use that RE5 style splitting up the sandbox between each other. But then there's other mechanics okay, what happens if one of the players gets fucked up during an alert? Do they just die and the other player has to keep going? How about maybe they get injured and you actually have to carry them to a specific point where you could revive them and it's not over until both of you are dead, sort of thing. Or maybe you could do things where one player can trigger an alert while the other one remains in stealth. Get really complicated with the AI that way. If we're trying to infiltrate somewhere like Camp Omega, and there's a lot of guards near the main base, I could run around in the Humvee causing a distraction while the other player goes in and grabs pause and gets out. Hell, you could do stuff like what Halo Reach does and allow players to be able to split screen map creators and create experiences for different kinds of multiplayers together. It's very cool being able to go into Forge with my brother and be okay, I'm gonna design this, and then he'll be okay, but we should set this up like this, this, and this, and I'll be alright, you do the structure, I'll set up where the weapons spawn and that kind of stuff. So there's a whole element of coordination and teamwork that goes into that as well. And then even for PvP multiplayer, again, those map creator elements, or just being able to open up a deathmatch and do 1v1 or 2v2s via split screen would be great, because I wouldn't have to deal with, players not being online, having to mod my PS3 to play Metal Gear Online, not having enough players for certain modes, have more stuff made for just those like casual, me and someone else right next to me wanting to shoot each other up in a Metal Gear game. And that's something that would work for 5. That's something that would work for the VR missions in 2. Hell, the VR missions in 2 would be perfect for map editors because it would be very simple on the game's like hardware. Like if you're running this on whatever, the console would probably have an easy enough time doing random gray or blue squares. And then, the proper actual main missions could be the more detailed environments. And then map creators could just be this abstract space. The fact that VR exists as a concept in Metal Gear opens up the doors for so many map creation and multiplayer possibilities. Because it's like an easy get out of jail free card for map design being super simplistic, so you can add these modes, so you can add split screen. There's so many ways that this could be done. And anyways, this was just like a casual discussion on how this could possibly come to fruition. But what are your thoughts on this? What is your dream multiplayer Metal Gear experience? And do you think the Snake Eater remake should feature some kind of split screen? Anyways, this has been Pliskin, over and out.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.